In today's video, we will go over our HTTP Connection Manager, which can be used to establish an HTTP connection to virtually any web service. When the connection is established, it can then be used in our other source, destination, or task components that accept an HTTP Connection Manager. Just to list a few of the prominent ones within our SSIS integration toolkit are JSON, XML components, HTTP requester components, web service components, and HTML table source. Inside our Integration Services project, we can add a connection manager by right-clicking in the Connection Manager's window and selecting New Connection. From the drop-down, we will select HTTP KingswaySoft and Add. In the General page, you may provide the base URL or static portion of your URL for the service. This will represent the address of the web service, and later a component that uses this connection can set the relative portion of the URL to work with a specific endpoint. The next section would be the general settings that can be provided. The first option is timeout. The value in seconds can be specified, or a value of 0 may be given for infinite timeout as required. The second option, chunk size in kilobytes, lets you set the chunk size when sending web requests. You may also provide a value of 0 here if chunking is not used. The third option, API throttling rate, lets you limit the number of requests that can be sent within an interval of time. This is helpful if the API has request limits to prevent throttling. The last section on this page, custom headers, will let you enter or remove headers that will be used in each request. You may add a header and select from the drop-down, or manually include by the header name. Under the second page, this is where the authentication mode is selected for the connection. In the drop-down, you may view and select an appropriate one. To get a better understanding of the different modes, we will go over each briefly. AWS Signature can be selected to authenticate and authorize API requests to AWS services by signing the requests with a cryptographic signature. The signature version may be selected from the drop-down of available versions. The access key, access secret, and session token may be generated from AWS. The AWS region will allow you to select your environment's region. Note, it is only available for Signature version 4. The service name option would also only be available for Signature version 4. If we switch over to version 2, AWS region and service name are not available, but there is a new setting called Signature Method. With this dropdown, the encryption type for the signature can be selected. The next authentication mode, Azure OAuth, has 3 authentication methods available: client credentials, certificate, and managed identity. The first mode is client credentials. The default authorization URL is populated, but the field is editable if a different authorization URL is required. Next, the tenant ID would be entered for your Microsoft organization. The component will use a default value, common, when no value is given when sending requests. Client ID is the application ID of your Azure app. Client secret would need to be generated from within the Azure app. For the scope field, you may set the resources and operations that an access token will be permitted. You would need to provide the resource identifier and a fix with .default suffix. The second OAuth type is certificate, and if we switch the OAuth type from the previous, the relevant values persist. The certificate location can be selected as Store or File System. For Store, you may click the ellipsis to browse the certificate chooser, or paste the certificate thumbprint directly. Certificate thumbprint allows you to specify the thumbprint of the certificate created for your app registered in Microsoft Azure Active Directory. If one is already selected, you may view the certificate details by clicking the View Certificate Details icon. If either Store or File System is selected, the path to the certificate supports both, including File System path and Shared Access Signature URL for Azure Blob Storage and Azure Files. For the path to the certificate, you may select the certificate file and password. The third OAuth type, Managed Identity, can be selected when working with a system-assigned managed identity that is tied to an Azure resource. The only additional field present is the resource that can be set as the identifier, URI, of the target service. The next option, Basic, can be used when just a basic authentication header needs to be added to your web requests. The username and password can be added in their respective fields, and the connection manager will add these credentials as base 64 encoded string. If you have a static access key, you would be able to use the bearer token authentication mode, and the connection manager would include a request authentication header with your bearer token value. Credentials for Basic, Digest, or NTLM authentication mode is similar to the basic mode. The domain would be the host or domain to authenticate against, and username would allow to specify the user account when connecting to your specified server. The next mode, Custom Token, makes a web request to retrieve an authorization token using a curl command. There is support through file or manually entered curl command. When file is selected, a path may be provided, or using the ellipsis, a file may be selected. The outcome is to have a token extracted from the response with the find token strategy and find token expression. For finding the token, you may use one of the methods from the dropdown: JPath, which can be used to navigate JSON object, XPath to navigate XML document, regex to parse the token using regex expression, or header, where a header value contains the token. The find token expression would be the expression to find the token based on the method selected. As we chose JPath, we would be providing the JPath to the node that contains the token. The token expiry can specify the expiry time in seconds, so a call can be performed to get a new token when it is expected to expire. A token expiry of 0 would indicate a new token needs to be requested after every request. When the token is extracted, it would be made available using the connection access token variable within our connection manager, as noted in the yellow text below. To test the configuration, the Test Custom Token button lets you test the token request by parsing the curl file or command. The curl file or command text will be populated if entered previously. You may send the request, and below you will see the request sent and response received. Based on the response, you may also select the Find Token strategy and set the expression. This will populate the custom token field if the expression is successful. If we go back into the previous page, the curl command may be entered manually by pasting the text into the curl command text field. The custom token value would be stored in the connection access token, and it can be used within the HTTP connection manager or any component that can work with this type of connection. As an example, we have added it into the authorization header. If you would like to work with a Google service, you may use the Google Service Account Authentication mode. Path to JSON key file will accept the path to a JSON key file, and when entered, this may populate the service account and client ID field. The service account specifies your Google service account, and the client ID is the unique identifier within your service account details. Lastly, the scope will need to be provided, which defines what permissions and level of access an application or service account is being requested. The next authentication mode is the JWT, which uses a JSON web token to securely communicate as a JSON object. If you have an existing JWT, you may select this option to import claims. In the window, you may provide the JWT signature, header, and payload. The claims will be imported into the JWT claims section. The name, value, and header are populated. For any claims that have an information icon, this will provide us with additional details such as types that are supported. The JWT secret source may be chosen from a file or manually entered in the field. For the Kerberos authentication mode, we would include the domain or host we want to authenticate against, as well as the user account and password to log into the specified server. The None option may be selected when the request does not require authorization in the case of the data being publicly available and no access restrictions are in place. OAuth 1.0 would be used and allows HTTP-based authorization for users to grant third-party applications access on another service without the need to share credentials. Request and access tokens are used to facilitate access and delegation. Most services have moved to OAuth 2.0, so we will just briefly cover the properties available. We can click the Generate Token button to take us to the OAuth token generator screen. If you have an existing token file, you may select the Import button to populate the general settings fields. Otherwise, the details may be manually entered. The signature method can be selected from the dropdown. The OAuth version type will already be pre-applied. Consumer key and secret are the credentials generated from the service you are connecting to. The sign-in URL is the endpoint where the application redirects users or sends requests to authenticate and obtain OAuth 1.0 credentials. The callback URI is the OAuth provider redirects to after authorization, returning the verifier or token to the application. The certificate location is the file path or certificate store location where the private key used to sign OAuth requests is stored. This may be a store or file system. The certificate thumbprint is the unique hash identifying the certificate used to sign OAuth requests, so the server can validate it, or when file system is selected, the password for the certificate file. We can switch to OAuth 2.0 authentication mode. The process will look similar to the previous method. If you have an existing token file, you may enter it here along with the password. There is an additional token location setting where we can set where to include the access token. In most cases, we can include the access token in the HTTP header or query string. The last option, custom, would be used rarely in advanced scenarios, such as inserting into request body or custom header or query string parameter. The access token will be placed where the connection access token variable is set within the component. Otherwise, the token will be ignored. When we select the Generate Token option, we are presented with a similar OAuth token generator window. We can import a token by providing the path and password. This would populate the previous window. Otherwise, if a new token needs to be created, we can set the grant type we want to work with. For the authorization code, this process will redirect the user to an authorization page specified. The user will log in to approve access. The sign-in URL is the base URL redirected to when authentication is required. The client ID and secret are the OAuth parameters used to identify and authenticate the application. The scope is the range of permissions requested by the OAuth parameter. The redirect URI is the callback URL where service sends the user back after they approve OAuth consent, along with the appended authorization code or token. PKCE may be enabled for PKCE app type, but the option is not available for client credentials or password grant type. When we select Next, this takes us to the Authorize App window. We can view the fully formed sign-in URL and edit the URL for any additional changes required, such as parameters. We can authorize within the app by launching the browser in the Token Generator window or within the default browser you have set in Windows settings. Within the App option has the benefit of automatically getting the code parameter from the redirect URI. For Authorize in Browser, you would need to paste the redirected URI into the pop-up window. In our example for the service, after the authorization step, we can copy and paste the entire redirected URL. This will take us to the Request Tokens page where some additional details can be provided. Request Tokens URL would be the base URL where we want to request the tokens from. Path to Access Token to specify the JPath to get the access token. Default path being access_token and can be changed. Path to Refresh Token can specify the JPath to get the refresh token. Default path is refresh_token and can be changed. Path to Expiry can specify the JPath to get the expiry. The default path is expires_in, but can be changed. Use Basic Authentication can be enabled, and this will send the client credentials over the authorization header rather than the request body. In the window below, you may view and edit both the request body and headers. The access token lifespan can be set manually if the expiry value cannot be received. This will let the component know when to perform a refresh. Additionally, you may enable if there is a sliding expiration or sliding window. In this case, the user would not need to re-authenticate with the resource server to get a new access token if before the expiration. When Get Tokens is clicked, we can save the token we have generated by providing a password we choose and clicking Save Tokens. A location would need to be selected for the token file. If we go back into Generate Token, we can show how the import option works on our newly created token. After providing the path and password, this will populate the fields as well as start the authorization process. This is helpful if another token needs to be created, as the details will be populated. If there are any changes, this can be done in the general setting page before continuing. There are two additional grant types: client credentials and password. The second grant type, client credentials, which is server to server, will be similar and use the client ID and secret so the application authenticates itself instead of a user to access its resources. The third grant type, password, means the application collects the user's username and password to generate a token. The next authentication mode, OAuth client credentials, would have many features of the previous type, where the credentials from the application can be added. For the scope, you may set the resources or operations that will be permitted. The request tokens, URL, would be the base URL, where we want to request the tokens from. Basic authentication can be enabled to send client credentials over authorization header rather than request body. The token location can be set to the HTTP header, query string, or custom, similar to the previous methods. The static token mode can be selected when a static token or API key that is expected to remain the same will be provided. You would be entering a token name and value. From the dropdown, you may select where the token will go in the request. In the HTTP header, as a query string parameter or custom. For the custom option, we provide the token value, and it is designed for advanced scenarios where it needs to be inserted elsewhere, such as the request body. In the request body, we would add an internally generated variable access token. Note that if the variable is not used, the token would be ignored. The next authentication mode, Windows Integrated Authentication, would use the current signed-in Windows user's credentials to authenticate, so there are no credentials input required. For the last mode, WSSE, or Web Service Security Extension, you would need to specify the username and password for this method, and this would be primarily used for SOAP web services. The credentials will be passed into a security header in the SOAP message. After we have set our authentication, the next page, proxy settings, can be configured. By default, this is set to no proxy. You may use the Auto Detect for System Configured Proxy feature if you have a system configured proxy. Otherwise, you may manually enter the proxy details, such as the server and port. If authentication is required, you may enable the option and provide a username and password. The last page, Advanced Settings, has certificate, miscellaneous, and error handling settings that can be applied. If working with a client certificate, you may select in your Windows Store or file system. For the store, which we recommend to use the certificate's thumbprint, may be provided. For store, you may enter the certificate directly or browse the list of available certificates using our certificate chooser. If you have an existing certificate, you can always click the icon to check the details. Otherwise, if file system is selected, you would need to enter the path to your certificate file, as well as a certificate password associated to the certificate. As in the previous cases, the component supports Azure Blob Access Signature URL in the certificate path. Under Miscellaneous Settings, we have the option to ignore certificate errors. When checked, this will ignore SSL certificate errors to the target service. We recommend to not enable this in a production settings unless the connection is secure, but it is helpful in troubleshooting to verify if the issue is SSL certificate related. Retry on Intermittent Errors option can be enabled to retry the requests in set intervals, if our component has determined an intermittent error has occurred. Allow auto redirects can be enabled if requests will be automatically redirected when receiving a server-side redirect. Drop authorization header on redirects can be used to specify if the authorization header should be dropped when redirect occurs. The last section, Error Handling HTTP Response Error Codes, are a list of HTTP response codes that will be treated as errors when this type of error occurs in our component. By default, these are the set options. Any can be removed or added. When the Retryable option on the right is checked, the component will retry a set number of times before failing. We can click Add the response code, and the description will be added to verify. Note that any response code not included in the error handling section will be ignored, and the component will show as successful when executed. Once we have everything configured, we can test the connection. You may select the HTTP method type from the dropdown. Ours is just a mock, so GET will work, but this can be changed to POST or another method as required. The URL will be present if configured from before. Additionally, here you may add the endpoint. The Import WSDL option will take you to the Import WSDL window. This allows you to load a WSDL file or by link. For Connection Manager, the None or Current connection can be selected. We can load the WSDL from a local file path, and when successful, this will load the additional details below. SOAP version is selectable between version 1.1 and 1.2. Service, binding, and operation all have a drop-down and a value can be selected. For the service, this defines the endpoint or address where the web service can be accessed. For binding, this specifies the protocol and data format used to communicate with the web service. And for operation, the specific action or function provided by the web service. An example is retrieving or modifying data. The request and response can be viewed based on the imported WSDL and selection. For the three tabs, you can view the custom headers, WS addressing headers, and namespaces in the test connection. Instead, you would import the WSDL from our other components that utilize the HTTP connection for SOAP service. The last page advanced would let you specify the field expansion depth the component will access in order to retrieve data from child elements. By default, this would be set to 5. Once you have the connection, depending on the type, you would be able to set this as a connection manager in our other components. For JSON-based endpoints, you may work with our JSON source or JSON extract task for extraction from a service, JSON destination, or JSON extract task to load data to a service. For SOAP-based endpoints, our XML components can be used. XML source or XML extract task for extracting data, and XML destination for loading to a SOAP service endpoint. The web service source and destination components can be used to retrieve or load from any SOAP-based service endpoint using a WSDL file. HTTP requester or HTTP requester task to send a series of HTTP requests and process their responses. HTML table source can be used to retrieve HTML documents from an HTTP request. We hope this has helped in understanding how to work with our HTTP components and has given you the confidence within your own integrations. KingswaySoft, data integration made easy.